Hello and welcome to the Transformation Project, a podcast and community for women who are looking to transform into the best version of themselves, no matter where they're at. A place where you can listen, learn and laugh along with us as we dive deep into different topics to help you live a happier, healthier and more fulfilled life. Remember, we are all learning here together, and therefore the content and opinions of the hosts and our guests should not be taken as medical advice. Please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions.
Well, hey everybody, and welcome back to the Transformation Project. We're so excited to have you here. How are you guys going this week?
It's been a big week, a very big week. So I guess everyone around the world had that new moon. I messaged Karen after it and I was like, I felt so good the day leading into the new moon. I was like, oh, this is going to be a new me. This is going to be great. And then literally the new moon happened. And the next day I could have stayed in bed all day. I felt like I was just like hit.
That's really odd you say that, you know, because my mum-in-law lives with us. And she said the same thing. She was all very excited about the new moon. But literally the next day, okay, this is me now with the moon thing, right? So I'm not into the moon. I only know about the moon because you guys told me about the moon and you promised me I would feel great with that moon. And I'm sure I did. I felt fine. Moon didn't worry me at all. It was very pretty though. My mother-in-law, however, who is super, super active, she's not going to say her age, but she looks incredible for her age. And she's really an energetic person, stayed home the next day. Yeah. Which is like not like her, and she slept like she had 2 naps. She does not do that. So weird.
Yeah, it was weird. I was with your mother-in-law. I was like ready to go, super excited, and then it just hit me, and I was like, "Wow, this is not what I was expecting." But
what happened to your moon, Karen?
So mine was the opposite of Jess. That's what we're having a conversation about, because I was feeling just like so up and down roller coastery leading into the full moon, and then the next day I was like, I went out for a walk with the dog and I was walking along and I'm like, I feel like this huge weight is lifted off my chest. I feel great. I just feel so amazing. And the moon is obviously affects the tide. So, and we're mostly water. So it makes a lot of sense how it internally can affect us as humans, even scientifically, right? Not stepping away from the woo-woo kind of stuff. But yeah, definitely it did make a big difference for me. And it's kind of been one of those weeks where everyone's hit the ground running and everyone's busy. And then this lockdown in Melbourne is affecting a lot of people. There's just a lot of things happening in the world, right? But
there's a lot going on. I feel like the moon is maybe a topic we need to include at some point for my educational purposes, if nothing else.
Yeah, we can do that. I actually, I recently went to a birthday party down in Sydney for one of Ed's family members. And I thought, one of the things that we need to do more in our little podcast is to kind of introduce ourselves and our stories so that people know a little bit more about us. And stepping back to this little family gathering, one of the family members called out to one of the other family members in the room about whether or not they were a glutard, which I'd never heard that term before, but, glutard, and he was referring to somebody who is gluten intolerant and generally make things really difficult when you're out together trying to find something to eat. And I know that, Yvette, that you and your family have had quite a few things going on around gluten and you have a whole lot of information. I thought it'd be really great to share that with some of our listeners and see if we can unpack some of that for them to make it a bit simpler.
Yes. So we are proudly non-gluten eaters in our house. We also don't eat dairy and a few other things. So our family is essentially primal, I guess, or paleo, depending on which you want to go. And so, no, we do not eat gluten. And I guess coming from my childhood where literally my favorite food is pasta, like my best food in the whole world was spaghetti bolognese. Like I would swap that for anything. And for my kids, it was like pizza, I guess. For a long time, it was just me and my single mom. And so obviously everything that contains gluten quite often is to the cheap food, right? It's like the pasta and the bread. And I can remember, night where my mom, we'd have pancake night because like literally all we had in the house was like flour and water and I was excited for pancake night, but single mom, like she had to make, and I didn't know there was any kind of like, but sometimes in the month we're like, happy day stews, and sometimes in the month, any single mom would know, is like pancake night. And so I struggled a lot with my health as a child. As I've said in previous podcasts, I've had so many antibiotics to the point where I am allergic to some 14 pairs of grommets. I only have like 60% of my hearing because of the scarring and all that sort of thing. And then as I kind of got older, there were other things around that I never related to gluten. But going backwards, so Kiara Lee, who's my oldest child, so I have ADD, she has ADHD. And so when she was in about grade 5 or 6, they wanted to put her on medication. And we said, no, we have to find another option. And so we took her to this lady, and she suggested removing gluten and dairy and sugar and colorants from Kiara's diet. And that was, for me, embarrassingly, the first time I had considered that food had anything to do with behavior or anything else. It had never crossed my mind before. I can't believe I'm actually saying that, but I guess for me, it means that there's other people out there that are exactly the same, that have never considered it. And so we removed all those things, and within weeks, her teachers were like, what have you done? She's like a different kid. And so obviously that goes up and down, and we've had battles with her growing, right? Because there comes that point where they want to rebel because everybody else is eating the stuff. Anyway, and then Savvy came along. Savannah had bacterial meningitis at 4 weeks old, and so her digestion was crap. She has a severe issue with dairy, but we also found that she had a severe issue around her digestion. And so because of all these different little things, we decided as a family to cut out gluten and dairy in our house. They're really like, there might be some sprinkles of cheese sometimes maybe, but essentially there's no gluten. That's like a hard and fast. But for each of us, it kind of shows up in a different way. And so I think it's interesting to let people know that when you think about somebody who is gluten intolerant, or you think about like, you know, you're going to be bloated and severe stomach pain, and that's all you relate to that. And also that if you're gluten intolerant, you're like a bit of a wuss and you kind of just need to suck it up. And what is that really? Because you don't have celiac disease. So like for real. And I understand like for restaurants, they're getting a lot more people who are like, oh, I'm gluten intolerant. You would know, Jess, right? You used to work in, and you're like, oh God.
It's hard because I like know it like from your point of view, and my mom same isn't celiac but gluten intolerant, and a lot of the restaurants they don't take it seriously, and they're just like, oh, get over yourself. Like,
yeah, like what is with you? Like, you honestly, it's one of those new age blah, right?
Diet things. Yeah.
So they don't take it seriously. So we always have to double check if we go to a restaurant that doesn't know us, we have to like double check, are you sure this bread is gluten-free? If Savannah's asked for something that happens to have bread on the side or whatever, because we know that very often we're not taken seriously. And so for a lot of people, it can look like different things. So in Savannah, if she has gluten, her stomach blows up massively, like really distended, really uncomfortable, lots of tummy issues. It's all kind of in her tummy related. If I have gluten, generally my stomach is okay, but I will get headaches or migraines, joint pain. I get itchy spots on my legs that I can't actually see. So I'm scratching, but there's nothing to scratch. Or you can get like little red dots, right? And I'll often see people walking in front of me in the shopping centers, and they look like mozzie bites on their legs. That are not mozzie bites, that they're scratching and they don't understand why they're itchy. All sorts of different things that look completely different. They're related things like depression and anxiety and panic attacks to gluten intolerance. So we certainly had our challenges with that. I've never struggled with depression, but Kiara Lee has. I've had panic attacks before. I haven't had those for a very long time. Even things like anemia, because the way that gluten works can affect the way that you absorb nutrients, and it can impact the way that you're actually absorbing iron and other things. So people can sometimes lose weight, unexpected weight loss, and think, oh, that's awesome. But it's actually because you're not getting enough nutrients. And so even things like brain fog, all that sort of thing can sometimes lift when you remove gluten from your diet. But people don't put the two together, or they just think, Cassie, you would know this, right? Because this is your industry, that I just have smelly poops. I just fart a lot. I'm a really, really farty person, right? Or I have diarrhea all the time. That's just what my poops look like. Or we've spoken about this, right? We don't know what each other's poops look like. So you just think that your cow pat poop is just how your poops are. That's not. So you just live with it, not realizing that you've got your diarrhea, your funny poop, or maybe constipation. I only poop once every week or once every 2 weeks, and I have migraines and whatever. You don't relate that to the fact that you're eating gluten every day until you take it out.
So what is exactly gluten, and what is the difference? Like you said it before, celiac and gluten intolerance.
So gluten is really something called a prolamine. It's part of carbohydrate binding protein called lectins. So everybody, all food, even humans, contain the carbohydrate binding proteins that are called lectins. And so some of those lectins, and there's two classes of them called prolamines and agglutinins, are an issue for humans when we digest them. And so prolamines are generally kind of your grains and your wheats, and gluten falls into prolamines. And then agglutinin has things in that sector that are things like nightshades and that sort of stuff fall into that. And so gluten is in, grains and legumes and other sort of seeds in the seed of the plant. So that's wheat, oats, barley, quinoa, rice, peanuts, and some soy. And so that's why you need to also check your soy to make sure your soy has been fermented or that it says gluten-free on it. So in the plant, they're really the protein that's responsible for the germination of the seed. And so usually when we're eating sort of food proteins, they're degraded down into really little tiny peptides and amino acids, and they can be carried across your gut epithelium in your small intestines. And though prolamines aren't, because they're not really compatible with our digestive system, and because the seeds that contain those prolamines also, as part of their defense mechanism, have little compounds in them that stop your enzymes breaking down that protein. And so really, as Karen has spoken about previously, right, your intestine and your gut is supposed to keep things in that's supposed to be in, and keep things out that's supposed to be out. And only the things that are meant to go out are supposed to go out. And so those little gut cells that keep the things in and only let out what they should be let out are called epithelial cells. And they've got on the inside, so inside your intestine, they've got all your little microvilli, which are like little fingers that kind of like grab all those nutrients. And then each cell is an individual cell on its own. And in between each cell is something called a tight junction. And so in a very basic way, the prolamine, so gluten, damages those little tight junctions really, and then allows for things to get out that shouldn't get out. And so then you're having things that are meant to be staying inside your gut, getting out, leaking out, with that intestinal permeability. That's why you hear people say the words leaky gut. And so it's getting out into your body. And then obviously that's where it starts causing, autoimmune issues. And because there's now something in your body that your body doesn't recognize and wants to attack. And so that's when you get those issues where your body literally will start attacking itself, causing different issues and inflammation. And so obviously inflammation is going to cause all these other things, like your joint pain and everything else, right? A lot of that stuff in your body is caused by inflammation.
So I have a question around that. So if gluten reacts that way in your body, why is it that everybody doesn't have the same issue? And also, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, this wasn't known as to be such an issue. So now why do you feel like it's more prevalent?
Yeah, for sure. So yes, definitely there are people that are more genetic disposed to being affected more or less. I would say though that in itself, prolamines do what prolamines do. So everybody is going to be affected in some way because that's just what it does. It's its self-defense mechanism. It's what it does. So it just depends on how much you're feeling that, really. So ultimately, if I had a choice, nobody would be eating gluten because it's not great for you. It doesn't do good things in your body. But some people just feel it more or more sensitive to it than others. And I guess as far as like the issue with gluten is also an interesting one. So my grandmother, originally in South Africa, she was like the baker of the family, right? And so she was always, we used to go every Sunday, we used to go to afternoon tea, and there would be like smorgasbord of like baking and amazing stuff, right? And she's this incredible baker. And so she would eat her own stuff. That was fine. And then she moved to New Zealand and suddenly got diagnosed with gluten intolerance and suddenly started having issues with that. My dad is the same. So again, this is not my biological dad, right? Or my biological grandmother. My family is very vast and convoluted. But he also only recently started noticing the itchy leg thing. And he would never have known it if it wasn't that I mentioned the fact that I got itchy legs. Now, we're not blood related at all, but he also got the itchy legs. He's also found that so for him, it's beer, right? Because there's gluten in beer. So if he's drinking and he has beer, he has struggles because he's super athletic. He's in his late 60s. He still does like 100 push-ups a day and runs every day. And he's like thebomb.com. But if he has beer and he's drinking gluten, he finds that his joints are painful and his muscles take longer to recover. So my grandmother, for example, in South Africa, she was fine. In New Zealand, there's an issue. And so I do think that, I mean, obviously, as we were saying, there's, some different documentaries around this, but I think the wheat that is around now is not the wheat as it used to be. And in changing that wheat genetically to make it more resistant to pests and, the weather and stuff, it's also made it more resistant to us. Mm. And so we're reacting more to it because, so it's not even the same thing. And I know a lot of people will like go to Europe, for example, in the days when we could still flit off to Europe, which we can't. when are those days be back? Anyway, haven't been to Europe yet. I feel like I missed that freaking boat.
Me too.
I know. When we're going to Europe at some point. But anyway, so they go to Europe, right? And they can eat pasta or, in Italy or bread in France or whatever, but they can't eat it in Australia. And so I do think it's got to do with what kind of a wheat it is and what's been done to it. And if it's even wheat anymore at all. I found out the other day that carrots were originally purple.
Yep.
Not orange. Now we eat orange carrots.
Only orange carrots.
Only orange carrots, but they used to be purple. People thought, okay, maybe we don't like purple carrot. I don't know. Anyway, so they've messed with it a bit. And so obviously it's messing with us even more.
Yeah. So what would you say, like, I'm just thinking if I ever told Ben that we were going to cut out gluten, like we definitely don't eat a lot of gluten anymore, but there's no way he would just go sneak it somewhere else. But what are some tips, whether for yourself or for a partner, to at least reduce it, but cut it out, like some alternatives?
Yeah, sure. So you can imagine when I came home and told our family that we were not eating gluten, it went down like a lead balloon, especially my favorite food was pasta. Chiara Lee's favorite food is pasta and pizza. So luckily by the time Savannah came around, we figured it out pretty much. And so she's always known she can't really have gluten, but she tries not to be a pain in the bum about it. She's really good about it. So I guess the first thing I would say is, in general, if somebody in your family can't eat gluten or is gluten intolerant, especially if it's a child, then the whole family is gluten intolerant in the house. When you're out and you're going to restaurants, go for your life. But I would generally say, especially if it's a kid, and I deal a lot with children and health issues with children. If it's your child, if your child can only eat the gluten-free bread, you can't be eating the soft white. It smells different. It feels different. Just don't do it. Not a great idea. The same thing, like if you're going to have gluten-free pizza, if you get the gluten-y pizza, your kid gets the gluten-free pizza. Not fair. Looks different, smells different.
Looks different.
Awful. Don't be eating the croissant. Like, you know what I mean? Unless they're not around. Like, just be nice about it. It's not easy. especially if it's kids. I would say in the beginning, try and swap. So instead of like just cutting it out, unless you're doing like an elimination protocol or something, right? Then you just want to cut out all crappy anything and you want to go back to like specific stuff. But if you're not doing that, I would say replace your pasta with a gluten-free pasta. Replace your bread with a gluten-free bread, right? Replace your Oreos with a gluten-free equivalent of Oreos in the beginning. It's not a great idea long-term, because once you start making things gluten-free or whatever else, you have to add a lot of stuff in to make it still palatable and make it so that you want to eat it. And it's not gross. And they've gotten really good at that. Like there's so many great alternatives with gluten-free stuff, but there's lots of added crap in there. So in the beginning, make swaps. Eventually try to minimize that. You can also swap out with quinoa and brown rice, millet, amaranth, buckwheat, even though it's called buckwheat, is actually a seed. It's not a wheat, so that one's fine. Oats are also gluten-free, although very often it will say like may contain gluten or whatever, because oat fields and wheat fields are usually next to each other or close proximity or where they're produced. And so very often, if you're celiac, you really want to make sure it says gluten-free, but they just worry that there might be some cross-contamination, which for most people who are just gluten intolerant, that's not going to really affect you. The same way as if somebody put a piece of bread with gluten on a board and then put a gluten-free piece of bread on the board and you ate it. If you're gluten intolerant, you'll generally be okay. Celiac's like, that's a no-go.
Yeah.
I would say just eat more actual food, produce like fruits and vegetables and not processed food, because the less you eat processed food, the less chance you're going to be eating gluten hidden in something. What else? Go through your whole pantry. You are going to want to check everything if you want to be serious about it, especially if you're someone who struggles with, like, I know migraines can be super debilitating. So if that's something, for me, I would be checking everything. If you can avoid a migraine by taking an extra hour out of your day and checking everything, if you think that might be a trigger, who knows if it is until you take it out, I would check everything, because there's gluten in, soy sauce and some vinegars and lots of salad dressings.
Herbs and spices? Do herbs and spices sometimes have hidden gluten in them?
It depends if it's like, if they say like a steak spice, for example, like that, sometimes.
That might.
Yeah. So you just have to really have a look. Same thing with drinks. Same thing with a lot of like like puddings and that sort of stuff can sometimes have gluten in it. And then there's also anything that says maltodextrin or caramel color will have gluten, and modified food starch has gluten. So you're just going to want to check that out. And then just to make life easier on yourself, like just be more prepared. So we have a barbecue at our school to like raise money on sports days. And so they'll do, hamburgers, and they'll do bacon and egg burgers and sausage on a bread, which was news to me when I came from South Africa to Australia. And people were like, it's sausage on a bread. I'm like, what? That's not food.
No, we don't have that in Canada either.
Bread. Anyway, so I bring my own bread because I get there really early. I get there at like 6:30 in the morning, and I know I'm probably not going home till 2. And so I know our sausages are gluten-free, so that's all cool. And I can eat bacon and I can eat eggs, and that's all aces. So I just bring my own bread. So I don't make a big fuss, and I'm not a pain in the bum. I just, here's my bread, put it on my bread. If Savannah goes to other people's houses, she does the same thing.
I was going to actually ask Yvette, when you go to the school carnivals, can we get you a T-shirt that says #glutard? So when you hand over your bread,
no, they don't have to ask any questions.
Sure. No, they know
like,
I'm
no.
a weirdo. I'm the person. Right, so I'm the person who brings like the speakers and the 90s hip hop soundtrack and is like doing the Running Man to Will Smith songs. I don't need to mess up my rep anymore. They're already worried about me.
Yeah, I feel like loud and proud is good, right? And I know that whole gluten-free kind of movement has come such a long way, and it's amazing, right? I think we need to be open and aware that there are people who have other choices and give them the options as well around their health. And for me, I know one of the biggest things that I see in my clinic is people coming in with all sorts of issues, and the only thing I recommend is try something for a couple of weeks. So if you feel like you've got any of those symptoms and things going on, remove it from your diet, try it for a couple of weeks, see how you feel, and then introduce it back in and see how you feel.
Like
if you get a response, you're like, oh, yep, okay, it's time to not have that in my life.
Yeah. Just one at a time though, and carefully. Like, don't go and have in one day like 4 different gluten things. Like, just have one thing and see what happens, you know. But I think very often people are surprised at how much better they feel and how much better their digestion feels. And I can't believe I'm going to say this publicly. So everyone says, oh, here we go. Everyone says, like, everybody farts, right? Everyone farts. I do not fart. I'm saying this publicly.
No, I'm with you,
I do not
Yvette.
fart unless I have gluten or popcorn. So if you're sitting near me at the movies, let me tell you, my husband's getting it later in the night and he's sleeping in a different bed. But anything with gluten and popcorn, there's troubles. Without that, Mama doesn't fart.
Mm.
My children have never heard me fart.
I'm going to bring some popcorn to conference.
Now everybody's going to be like, ooh, how do we sneak? Yum. So, and so obviously it's, this is a good point though. So, right. So so corn essentially is not gluten, right? But popcorn will mess up my stomach. And so will things like chickpeas. The worst pain I've ever been on is when I went to America on a flight and I said to them I was gluten-free. And so essentially for them, the gluten-free and the vegetarian meal was the same meal. And they gave me a chickpea curry. I have never been in so much stomach pain as after eating that chickpea curry. And so a note for some people out there too is that there are other things that mimic gluten in your system. Your system recognizes it in the same way and reacts to it the same way. That's maybe a whole different conversation. And so be aware that there are other things that your body will react to in the same way that is not necessarily just wheat. So for me, chickpeas are a no-go, for example.
Well, that is amazing, Yvette. Thank you so much for simplifying that a little bit. And hopefully we've given some listeners some ideas about the kind of things that they can expect if they're having gluten or some sort of intolerance experience in their body, and then some different options that they could try as well.
And if you know me, please do not talk to me about farting now. I feel like this is going to come back. This is a confession that's going to come back to haunt me somewhere.
Never.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, everybody. As usual, please like and subscribe. Obviously, you can find us on all different platforms now. We have a YouTube channel, Apple, Spotify, Audible, Stitcher, and also on Google Podcasts. So you can find us all over. Just search the Transformation Project and we will come up. And please give us a 5-star rating if you're enjoying what you're hearing and share us with your friends. See you all next week. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.